Hey guys, tonight we slip into the faint scratch of quills on thick, slightly rough paper, a sound that smells faintly of ink and candle smoke, and imagine yourself holding a folded sheet that carries more than words. It carries longing, mischief, and maybe a hint of rebellion. You probably won't survive this without secretly smiling at the boldness of women from the 1800s who turned ordinary letters into tools of flirtation, sometimes risking family disapproval, social embarrassment, or just a scolding from an overly nosy postmaster. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with where you are and what time it is. I love seeing who's awake while we wander through these ink-stained histories. You trudge through the morning fog of an 1800s town, perhaps cobblestone streets damp from overnight mist. You hear the clip-clop of horses and the distant bell of the post office, women dressed in high-collared gowns with sleeves tight enough to make your wrists ache just looking at them, prepare their letters. Each quill dipped carefully into ink, each line sloping elegantly across paper, creating a signature almost as telling as a smile. Historians still argue whether certain stylistic flourishes were purely aesthetic or subtle signals to an attentive reader. But imagine you hold a letter that might betray the depth of a heart's yearning without a single word saying, "I like you." Paper itself was a kind of currency. The higher the quality, the more it implied thoughtfulness, care, even wealth. You trace the texture under your fingertips and can almost feel the weight of social expectation. A cheap sheet might insult a suitor, an expensive one could make him blush with admiration. Perfume, pressed flowers, and even bits of lace tucked inside served as tiny signatures of personality. You might smirk now thinking, flower in an envelope, that's flirting? But it worked. The combination of ink, paper, and scent created a multi-sensory experience long before digital notifications or emojis made hearts flutter at the click of a button. Quills were tricky. One misstep and the ink would blot, ruining the carefully constructed curves of letters that hinted at personality, wit, and charm. Ladies practiced their penmanship like a modern-day influencer, curating their Instagram feed. Sloped scripts were considered alluring, upright strokes prudent, while a wavy, almost whimsical hand hinted at flirtation, rebellion, or perhaps both. The ordinary act of writing became intimate theatre, each word, comma, and margin carefully choreographed. Even sending a letter carried risk. Postmasters, those often oblivious yet gossip-prone arbiters of social propriety, could inadvertently read or misplace a note. A folded sheet tucked into a reticule or under a bonnet risked exposure, turning your private whispers into public amusement. And if the post was slow, the suspense could be delicious. Days stretched into weeks, each morning bringing hope or dread. You wait with a flutter, imagining the other hand dipping quill into ink, shaping a reply that might make your heart gallop. Historians still argue whether the intensity of these letter exchanges reflected true emotional depth, or just practice social performance. But for you holding the letter, it feels very real. The scents, the curves of the script, the faint sound of scratching quill. It's a tactile dance of attraction, patience, and daring. You smile quietly to yourself, imagining the thrill of pressing the folded note to your chest, knowing it carries secrets your family or even society would frown upon. The act of writing becomes a ritual, almost sacred. Each evening, women sit by candlelight, their shadows flickering across the walls, carefully choosing metaphors from nature. Roses for love, rain for longing, the sun for hope. You picture it, a bouquet of words, delicate, layered, intimate. Cross-writing, where lines overlap to conserve paper, adds a puzzle-like complexity that only the attentive reader can untangle. It's like whispering behind a closed door. You hear the message, but only if you know how to listen. And so as you sit there, tracing imaginary ink on your own desk, the world of 1800s letter flirtation stretches before you. Quills, paper, wax seals, and scent, all conspiring to transform mundane communication into a secret stage for desire and wit. Remember, this is just the beginning. The delicate game of flirtation has only begun, and the letters are waiting for you. You pick up a sheet of paper, thicker than anything you've used lately, and feel its weight like a small promise. In the 1800s, stationery was more than a medium. It was a symbol. You can almost hear the gentle hush of ladies in parlours, ink-stained fingers poised, choosing the perfect sheet that whispers sophistication, and, just beneath it, a dash of daring. Quality paper wasn't cheap. It was as prized as a well-chosen piece of jewellery, and sending a finely made sheet told your admirer, "I care enough to invest in us." Historians still argue whether the lavishness of stationery was purely aesthetic or deliberately a subtle status move, but either way, you can't help but marvel at the thoughtfulness behind each sheet. Imagine a young woman flipping through her stack of embossed paper, each sheet pressed with faint patterns, lightly scented, to mask the faint smoke of candles in the room. The cost alone made every letter a precious token, like a tiny, portable treasure chest. You chuckle, imagining someone today sending a $200 designer stationery set just to say, "Hello, I fancy you." Perfume, pressed flowers, or even a single feather tucked into the folds acted like the modern equivalent of stickers, GIFs, and emojis. Only these weren't cheap or digital. They were tactile, intimate, and, more importantly, risky. Sending scented or decorated paper could provoke a blush, or worse, suspicion. You trace the edge of an embossed border, imagining how the gentle indentations press against the fingertip. Perhaps a lavender scent clings faintly, or a pressed violet leaf falls neatly onto the page. Each embellishment served as a signature, a subtle cue for the receiver. Postage was measured and calculated carefully. Sending a delicate, thick sheet wasn't only costly, it was a gamble that your words would survive the journey intact. Letters folded in careful triangles, tucked into pockets, or hidden under fans, became more than communication. They were miniature adventures. And the seals, oh, the seals! Wax in red, green, or even black, pressed with a ring or signet, was far from decorative fluff. A seal could hint at urgency, intimacy, or mystery. Placement mattered. On the top corner, casual, centered, serious intent. A crooked seal might be playful, almost teasing. You might grin now, imagining the detective work involved. What did she mean by that tilted scarlet wax? Historians still argue whether these choices were consciously coded or instinctive artistry, but for the recipient, the thrill was undeniable. As you consider the paper and wax, you realize that the materials themselves, the texture, the scent, the weight, become part of the message. Just as a hand squeezed today can express more than words, a folded, perfumed sheet with a careful seal spoke volumes without a single line written. You picture a suitor nervously breaking the seal, inhaling the faint perfume, and unfolding the letter to reveal delicate, flowing handwriting. The interplay of anticipation, tactile pleasure, and secret meaning creates a gentle intoxication, a slow-burning excitement that no hurried modern text could replicate. Even the smallest choices mattered. A slight curve in a capital letter, a pressed flowers placement, or the tiniest smudge of ink could imply teasing intimacy. You probably wouldn't notice it yourself today, but in that age, these little flourishes were as potent as a whispered compliment in a crowded ballroom. And you can't help but smile thinking of the meticulous care women devoted to each sheet, knowing the eyes of their beloved, and sometimes the eyes of society, would judge every line. By the time you fold the letter carefully and apply a soft, fragrant seal, it's more than communication. It's an artifact of affection, an investment of time, thought, and social courage. You imagine the envelope in a post bag, rattling along cobblestones, carried by a young postman with a penchant for gossip, and shiver slightly at the precariousness. Paper wasn't just paper. It was a conduit for emotion, flirtation, and the slow, thrilling dance of anticipation that makes the human heart race even across miles. You lean closer to the envelope, noting the rich red wax pressed with the delicate impression of a signet ring, and realize that in the 1800s sealing wax was more than just decoration. It was a private handshake, a whisper of identity, and sometimes a flirtatious wink. The color, the placement, Even the slight imperfection in the stamp could carry a meaning only the intended reader might decode. A bright red seal in the center might hint at urgency or passion, while a green one tucked in the corner could suggest playfulness or a secret joke. Historians still argue whether every nuance of wax usage was intentionally coded, but for someone holding that folded paper, the thrill of deciphering intent was very real. You picture the ritual, dipping a stick of wax over a gentle flame, letting it melt to a tiny puddle, and then pressing the ring with care. Sometimes ladies would crush a petal into the wax before sealing, or lightly perfume it, creating a multi-sensory puzzle. You can't help but chuckle at the thought. Today, we struggle just to send a text without autocorrect sabotaging us, but back then, an intimate message required fire, wax, and a steady hand. It's a small performance, a personal ceremony, turning the act of sending a letter into a theatrical event. The placement of a seal was strategic. A centered seal declared seriousness. A seal at the top might suggest a breezy, almost casual affection. A crooked or slightly smudged impression could tease or provoke a playful challenge to the recipient to interpret correctly. You imagine a young man squinting at the wax, analyzing the tilt and color, pondering whether to blush, laugh, or respond in kind. The artistry and intention in these details elevated a simple note into an intimate dialogue, conducted in a language of ink, paper, and wax. It wasn't just the sender's artistry that mattered. The postmaster played a starring role in the theatre of flirtation. In small towns, letters often passed through hands more curious than professional. A nosy postmaster could inadvertently alter the course of romance, delaying, misplacing, or even reading a note before it reached the intended recipient. You feel a shiver imagining secrets nearly exposed by human error. Some women even created faux addresses, secret codes, or disguised their writing to thwart prying eyes. Historians still argue whether such precautions were standard or reserved for the boldest flirtatresses, but the risk added spice to the exchange, and then there's the thrill of scent. Perfume wasn't merely decorative, it was a signature, a sensory extension of personality and intent. A faint lavender, rose, or even patchouli trace could announce familiarity, attraction, or mood before a single word was read. You can almost smell it now, imagining lifting the envelope to inhale subtle hints that speak directly to memory and desire. It's intimate in a way modern digital messages can never replicate, a letter that literally carries the presence of the sender. Beyond color, placement, and scent, the seal often bore the sender's personal mark, a crest, initials, or tiny emblem, a secret code woven into the very wax. It was both protection and declaration. "This is from me, only for you." You grin, thinking how such small objects could hold such power, acting as both gatekeeper and messenger, transforming paper into an artifact that flirts, teases, and entices before a single line is read. Each letter, sealed and fragrant, was a portal to longing, imagination, and the slow, delicate game of courtship. Even today, the practice feels almost magical. You imagine holding that envelope in your hands, tracing the edges of the wax, inhaling the faint perfume, sensing the care, the risk, and the hope embedded in its folds. A small, tactile bridge across distance, through time, and across social conventions. An intimate conversation in which every detail matters. And in this quiet, candlelit world, you recognize that flirtation was never just words. It was the marriage of material, motion, and mystery wrapped up in wax. You unfold the letter with care, feeling the weight of not just paper, but intent. In the 1800s, even the act of opening a letter was ritualized. There was a moment of suspense, almost ceremonial, as the folds were eased apart, the wax giving way with a faint snap. The first line of a letter was crucial. It wasn't merely greeting, it was an invitation into intimacy, a whisper of personality. Historians still argue whether the specific phrasing of openers, my dearest, versus esteemed friend, was strictly guided by etiquette or subtly coded flirtation. But for anyone receiving the note, the impact was immediate and tangible. You imagine a young woman, quill in hand, just hours ago, choosing her words with care, balancing wit, modesty, and allure. Each sentence was a performance, each comma a potential flirtatious wink. The art of letter writing in this era demanded more attention than modern text messages require in milliseconds. Misspelling a name or misjudging a tone could tip the delicate balance between playful interest and outright scandal. You can't help but smile at the painstaking effort. Nowadays, autocorrect might ruin your flirting in seconds, but back then, it was pen, paper, and nerves. And then there's cross-writing, a curious and somewhat maddening practice. To save paper, writers would turn the sheet 90 degrees and write over the existing text in a crisscross pattern. To the untrained eye, it looks like a confusing mess of lines, but to the recipient, it's a secret code, a demonstration of ingenuity and intimacy. You picture squinting, head tilted, trying to decode the layered message, and you chuckle. It's the 1800s equivalent of sending someone a multi-level encrypted meme. Perfume, pressed flowers, or tiny illustrations added layers of personality, all carried into a single, folded sheet that was, in essence, a miniature world of flirtation. Ink color mattered too. Black ink was standard, but brown, blue, or even deep purple could signal intent. Certain shades suggested seriousness, others playfulness. You might smirk now imagining a recipient analyzing the ink's hue, like a detective at a crime scene, trying to discern mood and meaning. Some women even experimented with multiple colors on a single page, creating subtle patterns that spoke volumes without a single overt statement. Historians still argue whether these color choices were intentional cues or accidental outcomes of limited ink supplies, but the interpretation mattered far more than the fact. The physical handling of the letter added another layer of intimacy. A crease here, a gentle fold there, or even the pressure of handwriting could convey emotion. You picture the letter being pressed lightly to a cheek, smelled in secret, or slipped under a pillow while the heart races with anticipation. Such tactile engagement amplified the message. A simple sentence could carry longing, mischief, or a subtle tease that words alone couldn't convey. Even mailing the letter was an art form. You imagine the postman navigating cobblestone streets, the letter bouncing gently in a satchel, scent mingling with the musky leather and horse sweat, carrying both anticipation and risk. Small towns often had a single post office, meaning that a curious neighbor or clerk could glimpse the envelope, heightening the thrill. Some women adopted secret codes, initials, or disguised handwriting to preserve privacy, a playful challenge for the intended recipient to decipher. So you sit there, unfolding your imaginary letter, smelling faint lavender pressed into the fibers, seeing the cross-written words, and imagining the careful ink lines, each slightly slanted to suggest a shy smile. The paper feels alive, a vessel for personality, intention, and perhaps the first stirring of love. In these small rituals, the folding, sealing, sending, and decoding, the act of flirtation becomes tangible, almost sacred, a dance of anticipation and subtlety that stretches across miles, boundaries, and social conventions. You realize with a quiet thrill that the letter is more than communication. It's a bridge to emotion, a portable heartbeat carried on ink and paper. You trace your fingers along the faint impressions left by a quill, imagining the careful hand that wrote each loop and curl. In the 1800s, handwriting was more than legibility. It was a reflection of personality, breeding, and, crucially, flirtation skills. A flowing, elegant script could suggest grace, education, or refinement, while a slightly rushed hand might hint at excitement, urgency, or playful impatience. Historians still argue whether these nuances were consciously manipulated for romantic effect or merely natural expression. But for the recipient, every slant, every flourish, spoke volumes. Think of the quill itself, sharp, scratchy, sometimes temperamental. You picture someone dipping it into ink with trembling fingers, trying not to blot, trying to convey wit and warmth with every careful stroke. Mistakes were tricky. A smudge could suggest nervousness, eagerness, or carelessness. Some women would deliberately smudge a letter to mimic emotion, adding an extra layer of intimacy. You probably won't survive trying to recreate this today with a ballpoint pen and sticky notes. There's also the curious phenomenon of secret alphabets. Some correspondents devised their own shorthand or cryptic symbols, turning letters into puzzles. A loop here might mean a kiss, a dot there could indicate longing. The more obscure the symbol, the more fun or stressful it became for the recipient. Imagine the mental gymnastics required to decode these private codes without revealing your blushes to family members hovering nearby. Perfume was still employed, sometimes dabbed directly on key letters, making the code sensory as well as visual. Margins, spacing, and indentation mattered too. A carefully spaced paragraph could imply deliberation, squeezed lines might suggest urgency or passion, some writers would leave gaps, small, deliberate pauses like modern emojis, creating rhythm and subtle cues that the reader instinctively understood. You smile imagining a young man over a candle, leaning in, squinting at carefully pressed lines, and feeling the weight of a message that goes far beyond mere words. The social stakes were high. If letters were intercepted, misread, or delivered to the wrong person, the consequences could range from embarrassment to social scandal. Families, neighbors, and even the local postmaster might pry, making discretion paramount. Women often hid letters beneath floorboards in books or inside clothing folds. The thrill of secrecy amplified the emotional impact. Receiving a clandestine message was not only romantic, it was daring. Historians still debate how widespread these tactics were, but the documented instances make your pulse quicken. And the humor, oh, the humor. Flirtatious letters often contained playful jabs, gentle teasing, or ironic commentary on societal norms. A clever aside about a stiff cravat, a too-tight corset, or a nosy aunt could lighten the mood while conveying intimacy. The ability to balance charm, wit, and propriety was a prized skill, a dance of words that required intelligence as much as emotion. You can't help but imagine the smirk on the sender's face as they penned a line designed to make the recipient chuckle, blush, and perhaps sigh in equal measure. Even the choice of closing was an art. Yours faithfully suggested decorum, ever devoted hinted at deeper feeling. With a mischievous heart invited playfulness. The signature itself, carefully inked, sometimes included tiny flourishes, a curl of a letter, a subtle tilt, a loop that resembled a wink. It was an intimate signature, more than just a name. It was a seal of personality, a private nod to the recipient that said, "Only you will truly understand this." By the time the letter was folded, sealed, and slipped into the envelope, it carried layers of meaning: scent, handwriting, symbolism, humor, and risk. Each component, the quill, the ink, the paper, the perfume, the wax, the hidden alphabets, worked together to create a multisensory experience that modern text messages can only dream of replicating. The letter was alive, a tactile heartbeat bridging distance, inviting curiosity, fostering desire, and teasing the imagination with every gentle fold. You realize that in those quiet moments of reading, every sensation, the smell, the touch, the visual cues, blurs the line between communication and seduction, between simple affection and elaborate artistry. You imagine the anticipation of waiting for a reply, the days stretching longer than they should, each moment weighted with the possibility of disappointment or delight. In the 1800s, letters traveled at the pace of horses and footpaths, carrying messages across towns, counties, and sometimes continents. A single day's delay could feel like an eternity, and the uncertainty heightened the emotional intensity. Historians still argue whether the slow communication inadvertently fueled more passionate exchanges, or whether it simply caused anxiety for the overly romantic, but there's no denying that waiting was part of the ritual and part of the charm. Sometimes women would send multiple letters to the same person over a short period, layering messages like tiny ripples on a pond, each one hinting, teasing, or testing the waters. You can picture the thrill of discovering not just one envelope, but a small stack, each sealed with a different wax impression, each carefully perfumed. It's a sensory overload compared to today's instant notifications. This is the 19th century version of opening 5 DMs at once, except every single one carries thought, intention, and risk. Then there's the practical artistry of letter concealment. Some women slipped notes into the lining of their gloves, others hid them in books with secret compartments, and a few even sewed messages into undergarments or handkerchiefs. You probably won't survive trying that in your modern apartment, but it's charmingly elaborate. Each hiding spot was a gamble, a flirtation with risk, and sometimes a subtle performance. Would the intended recipient notice the hidden message, or would fate intervene? Historians still debate whether these methods were widespread or reserved for the most daring romantics, but they certainly add colour to the narrative. Postmarks themselves became part of the intrigue. The town stamp, the ink colour, or the placement could signal the sender's location, social status, or even mood. A letter arriving from a distant city implied adventure or worldly sophistication. One marked with a local post office's imprint suggested familiarity and domestic charm. Even the angle of the stamp could be interpreted. Some letters leaned toward oblique placement. A visual wink meant only for the recipient. You grin, imagining lovers analysing the tiniest details, turning every envelope into a puzzle. You can't ignore the social commentary embedded in letters either. Women often included subtle critiques or observations about societal norms, expectations, or even family politics. A well-placed joke about a neighbour's finicky horse, a clumsy dance at the last ball, or a ridiculous fashion trend could be more than amusement. It could be a statement, a shared secret understanding that strengthened the connection between writer and reader. Such commentary gave letters a dual life, one public, readable by anyone who happened to peek, one private, layered with intimate meaning for the recipient alone. The emotional intelligence required was astonishing. Writers had to balance teasing with propriety, humour with sincerity, affection with discretion. You picture someone sipping tea, carefully drafting a paragraph, then setting the quill down to reread, imagining how it will be perceived. The subtle interplay of tone, word choice, and pacing was as critical as the content itself. Even the faintest pause or deliberate line break could suggest hesitation, longing, or playfulness. It's almost like a choreography of words, each step carefully planned yet appearing effortless. And let's not forget the role of borrowed phrases and literary quotes. Many women sprinkled letters with lines from poetry or novels, weaving shared cultural touchstones into their private messages. A snippet from Byron or Shelley could convey desire, wit, or melancholy without ever needing direct confession. It was both a nod to education and a flirtatious game, a way to demonstrate sophistication while keeping the recipient guessing about the writer's true feelings. By the time the letter had been carefully folded, perfumed, and dispatched, it had already taken on a life of its own. It wasn't simply paper and ink, it was strategy, risk, art, and a heartbeat of emotion captured for the eyes of one intended person. You lean back, imagining the recipient turning the envelope over in their hands, savouring every detail before even breaking the wax. Every letter is a performance, every postmark a punctuation, every quill stroke a whisper. And somewhere between anticipation and imagination, you realize that the slow cadence of these exchanges, the intricate codes and delicate rituals, made each connection feel infinitely more profound than anything you could tap out on a glowing screen today. You picture the act of reading a letter by candlelight, the soft flicker casting shadows across the page in the reader's face. In the 1800s, this intimacy, the dim light, the smell of ink and paper, the quiet of a late evening, amplified every word, every flourish, every deliberate pause. Historians still argue whether the ambience of candlelit reading was intentionally sought after or simply a necessity due to the lack of electric lighting, but there's no doubt it contributed to the emotional resonance. You can almost feel the warmth of the room, the faint rustle of the letter as it's unfolded, and the quickened heartbeat that accompanies a carefully chosen phrase. Some letters were intentionally dramatic in length, curling across multiple sheets of delicate paper, often tied with ribbons or sealed with coloured wax. Longer letters allowed the writer to build suspense, to layer emotion and humour, to reveal quirks and secrets gradually. You probably won't survive writing 5 pages by hand without cramping your hand, but back then, endurance was part of the charm. Readers would savor each page, pausing to imagine the sender's expressions, the slight smile or playful glare that accompanied each word. Quirky additions weren't rare. Women sometimes drew tiny doodles in the margins, a flower, a cat, a little hat, to personalize their message further. Others would press petals, leaving a subtle imprint that added fragrance and texture. You grin at the thought, a note that carries both words and scent, a tactile and olfactory puzzle designed to delight and intrigue. Some recipients even kept letters in special boxes or drawers, opening them again years later to relive the thrill, the humor, the affection of moments long past. Humor and playfulness were essential. Letters often contained inside jokes, teasing remarks about local gossip, or subtle commentary on fashion or etiquette. A line about a gentleman's awkward bow or a neighbor's extravagant bonnet could provoke laughter while simultaneously strengthening connection. The writer's wit, timing, and choice of observations turned even mundane topics into intimate exchanges. Historians still debate whether these moments of levity were purely for amusement or deliberately used to gauge the recipient's temperament, but the effect on the recipient was always tangible. Sometimes letters served as games of strategy. Writers experimented with ambiguous phrasing, leaving certain statements open to interpretation, daring the recipient to read between the lines. A seemingly casual compliment might hide admiration. A playful critique might signal affection. The subtle tension between clarity and mystery kept both correspondents engaged, sharpening their emotional awareness. You imagine someone pausing, squinting at the text, rereading a sentence, trying to decipher hidden intentions, like solving a puzzle meant only for their eyes. Ink itself was a tool of expression. Certain shades carried symbolic meaning. A deep purple might suggest sophistication, blue could imply calm affection, and black remained neutral but formal. You chuckle imagining someone analyzing a note for ink color like a detective, studying fingerprints, trying to extract not just the message but the mood. Even accidental smudges could add unintended emotion, frustration, haste, or excitement, turning a simple quill stroke into a subtle narrative cue. The social rules governing letters were strict yet full of nuance. Public exposure of a private letter could ruin reputations, so discretion was paramount. Women developed clever strategies for concealment, hidden folds, disguised handwriting, secret compartments in books or clothing. Some even devised codes that only their intended recipient could understand, turning ordinary communication into a playful yet tense negotiation of trust. You imagine the thrill, sending a message and knowing that someone miles away holds your carefully crafted thoughts, deciphering the hidden meanings, savoring each curve of the script. By the time the letter was set aside, you realize it's more than words. It's a physical and emotional bridge between two people, a carefully curated blend of thought, art, humor, and desire. Even in the quietest, most mundane moments, these letters brought intimacy, suspense, and connection into the lives of those separated by distance, social expectation, or circumstance. You lean back, imagining the faint scent of lavender and ink lingering in the air. A reminder that in the 1800s, flirtation wasn't just communicated, it was performed, savored, and deeply felt. You sit with a letter in hand, noting the delicate edges, the slightly uneven folds, and the faint sheen of sealing wax. Letters weren't just messages, they were artifacts carrying the personality, mood, and intentions of the sender in ways that modern texts simply cannot. In the 1800s, every gesture, how the envelope was folded, how the seal was pressed, how the paper smelled, was part of the communication itself. Historians still argue whether these nuances were consciously crafted for effect or arose naturally from social etiquette, but you can't deny their impact. You probably won't survive reading 5 letters in a row without feeling like you're in a candlelit romance novel, but it's worth imagining. The choice of stationery was meaningful. Thick, high-quality paper suggested refinement and wealth. Colored paper might hint at playfulness or flirtation. Some women used monogrammed or embossed paper, turning each letter into a personalized performance. You picture a young lady carefully selecting her favorite set, making sure every sheet aligns with the image she wants to project. There's a curious tension here between authenticity and performance, and it's exactly this tension that made letter writing in the 1800s so captivating. Sometimes letters included unconventional inserts, pressed flowers, snippets of lace, tiny sketches, or even locks of hair. Each added a layer of intimacy, a sensory cue that spoke louder than words. Imagine receiving a single violet pressed between the pages, the faint fragrance lingering for days, carrying a hidden message of longing or admiration. The creativity in these small gestures shows that flirtation wasn't just about text, it was about experience. You chuckle imagining the modern equivalent, sending a screenshot of a flower emoji and hoping it conveys the same effect. Humor remained central. Witty remarks about social norms, playful exaggeration, or gentle teasing were common. A comment about the local vicar's habit of over-pronouncing every R or the neighbour's ridiculous attempt at ballroom dancing could amuse and bond the correspondence. Some women would even compose tiny satirical sketches or little riddles within the margins, adding a layer of intellectual challenge to their playful banter. Historians still debate whether these humorous flourishes were calculated strategies or spontaneous amusements, but the result was a lively, engaging correspondence that left both sender and recipient smiling. Then there's the matter of timing. Letters were often sent to arrive at specific moments. A Monday morning to start the week with cheer, a Friday to hint at weekend rendezvous, or late evenings to coincide with the recipient's quiet moments. The precise timing could affect interpretation. A prompt reply suggested eagerness. A delayed response might signal a test of patience or mild flirtation. You imagined someone watching for the postman, heart quickening at the arrival of a neatly folded envelope, an anticipation that digital notifications can't replicate. The art of secrecy was equally crucial. A letter left in plain sight could cause embarrassment or scandal, while clever concealment became part of the playful dance. Secret compartments in books hollowed out objects, or hidden folds allowed women to communicate under the watchful eyes of family, servants, or nosy neighbours. Sometimes letters were even disguised with mundane scribbles or false addresses, ensuring only the intended reader could unlock their hidden meaning. You grin, picturing the recipient leaning over the note, tracing the folds, deciphering its secrets like a spy. Finally, consider the closing line. In the 1800s, a signature wasn't enough. Writers added subtle sign-offs, each loaded with meaning. Yours in anticipation hinted at longing, ever faithfully emphasized constancy, with a playful heart invited intimacy. Even the tiny curl on the final letter of a name or the slight tilt of a signature could serve as a personal wink, a hidden nod that only the recipient would understand. By the time a letter reached its reader, it was not just a message, it was an entire performance, an immersive, emotional, and often playful experience that bridged distance, time, and social expectation. You can almost hear the creak of the wooden floorboards as someone paces while waiting for a reply, each step echoing the anxious anticipation that accompanied every letter sent in the 1800s. Patience was an art form, honed not out of choice but out of necessity. Postal services were slow, inconsistent, and sometimes downright unreliable. Historians still argue whether the emotional intensity of letter writing was amplified by these delays or whether it merely caused unnecessary stress for both parties. You probably won't survive imagining your feelings held hostage for days or weeks, but that's exactly the thrill of these exchanges. Women became masters of pacing and expectation. You picture a carefully orchestrated delay, sending a playful note on Tuesday and waiting until Thursday to dispatch a second, ensuring the recipient's attention never waned. This was strategic. Too frequent correspondence could appear desperate, too infrequent could seem disinterested. Subtle manipulation wrapped in charm was the secret currency of flirtation. A humorous anecdote about a neighbour's runaway goat, or a gentle tease about an uncle's absurd fashion choice, could keep the recipient engaged without overtly declaring affection. You might smirk imagining today's texts would barely compare. An instant LOL can't compete with weeks of suspenseful anticipation. Letters also served as emotional mirrors. Writers often embedded small tests, a seemingly innocent question, a literary reference, or a coy remark could gauge the recipient's intellect, humor, or emotional sensitivity. A compliment on a shared literary interest might elicit a thoughtful response. A playful jab could reveal how easily one laughed at themselves. You lean back, picturing someone with quill in hand, carefully drafting lines, then setting the pen down to reread, imagining how the recipient will interpret every nuance. Quirky habits appeared too. Some women would perfumize their letters with rosewater, lavender, or other floral scents, subtly affecting the mood of the reader. Others pressed flowers or tiny leaves inside the pages, creating both a visual and olfactory experience. You grin at the thought. A single violet might carry more emotional weight than a paragraph of declarations. Even smudges from hurried writing or the faint curve of a misaligned letter added personality, accidental, yet intimate. The ritual extended beyond writing. Delivery itself became performative. A letter might be entrusted to a friend, slipped into a basket, or hidden in plain sight for the recipient to find at the perfect moment. Historians still debate whether these elaborate methods were widespread or reserved for the more daring romantics, but they certainly added layers of intrigue. You can imagine someone tiptoeing across a parlor floor, hoping no one notices the hidden missive, the thrill of secrecy mingling with anticipation. The content often mirrored contemporary debates, morality, and social trends. Letters could discuss fashion faux pas, the latest theatre production, or the absurdity of certain social rituals. You might chuckle imagining a witty critique of corset fashion or an exaggerated description of a clumsy dance partner. These shared observations fostered intimacy, creating a private world within public society, a realm where humor, intelligence, and charm intermingled freely. By the time the recipient unfolded the note, it wasn't merely a message, it was a crafted experience. Every line, every crease, every scent and smudge carried meaning. The slow cadence, the clever wordplay, the subtle tests, and the tiny flourishes all combined into a conversation that transcended mere text. Letters became bridges across time and space, intimate and tangible, playful and profound. You might sigh, realizing that while modern messages are instantaneous, they rarely carry the weight, texture, or suspense of a hand-delivered 19th century letter. And that's exactly what made this form of flirtation so captivating. You imagine opening a letter on a rainy afternoon, the patter of drops against the window syncing with your heartbeat, as if nature itself were complicit in the drama of correspondence. Weather, surprisingly, played a role in the experience of letters. Historians still argue whether the delayed arrival of rain-soaked missives intensified emotional responses or simply frustrated the anxious recipients. But there's something undeniably romantic about imagining a damp letter carried across muddy streets, its ink barely smudged, its scent faintly mingled with the petrichor. You probably won't survive picturing yourself anxiously shaking water from a folded sheet while wondering if the sender meant that playful insult literally or figuratively. Women of the era developed a highly nuanced understanding of tone. A simple word could carry multiple meanings depending on punctuation, the number of exclamation points, or the tilt of handwriting. You picture someone leaning close to the candle flame, squinting at a gently curved yours, trying to decipher whether it indicates amusement, flirtation, or mild exasperation. Subtlety was everything. A careless dash of ink could change the tone entirely. Even a small smudge might suggest the writer was distracted by thoughts of the recipient, a tiny, accidental intimacy that added to the charm. Quirky habits became almost standard. Some ladies preferred writing while listening to music played on a harpsichord or pianoforte, claiming it helped the words flow with grace. Others kept small mirrors nearby to practice the ideal quill angle, ensuring every stroke conveyed elegance. You might chuckle imagining someone adjusting posture and pen position like a mini calligraphy yoga session, all for the sake of flirtatious perfection. Letters often contained layered codes, from simple ciphers to playful literary references. A line lifted from a popular novel might be a compliment disguised as literary analysis, or a subtle reference to a shared poem could reveal longing without ever naming it outright. Historians still debate how widespread these codes were versus how much modern scholars romanticize their existence, but their presence added an element of intellectual thrill. You lean back, picturing the recipient puzzling over a single sentence, trying to determine whether it's flattery, teasing, or a heartfelt confession hidden in plain sight. The physicality of writing played a role too. Heavier, textured paper suggested seriousness. Thin, translucent sheets implied intimacy. Some women even used colored inks to subtly signal mood, a deep blue for calm affection, crimson for passion, or purple for playful sophistication. You grin at the thought. A single hue could replace a paragraph of explanation, communicating emotions more efficiently than words ever could. Timing and placement remained crucial. A letter left on a windowsill to catch the morning light, or tucked beneath a pillow for discovery at night, transformed the simple act of reading into a ritual. A recipient might anticipate the letter all day or stumble upon it unexpectedly, making the interaction feel alive, spontaneous, and thrilling. You probably won't survive imagining the miniature panic and excitement of discovering a note in the wrong pocket or drawer, but that's exactly what made the exchange so memorable. By the time you finish the final line, the letter has achieved its purpose. It has connected two minds across space, crafted suspense, provoked laughter, and stirred the heart. In a world without instant messaging, without emojis or read receipts, these small paper portals carried the weight of human emotion with deliberate care, every fold and flourish adding to the depth of feeling. You can almost feel the thrill of anticipation, the subtle brush of ink against fingertips, and the quiet, lingering smile as the message settles, imprinting itself on memory. You lean against the wooden railing of a balcony, imagining the flickering candlelight illuminating a letter as it's being written. In the 1800s, women didn't just write letters, they curated them. Each line, each margin, and even the choice of quill and ink had meaning. Historians still argue whether these decisions were primarily aesthetic or subtly manipulative, but either way, the effect was profound. You probably won't survive picturing the painstaking deliberation that went into something we now send in 10 seconds via text. Some women developed signature flourishes, swirls and loops unique to their hand that served almost like secret stamps of personality. A curl on the letter Y might signal playfulness, a slight underlining could indicate earnestness, and the occasional exaggerated loop might hint at flirtation. You imagine a young lady tilting her head in concentration, quill poised just so, as if performing a dance only she and her recipient could understand. These small gestures elevated correspondence to performance art, and the recipient became an audience member in a private, ongoing show. Humor crept in through wordplay and gentle mockery. A witty remark about the local baker's inability to frost a cake evenly, or a playful jab at a cousin's excessive hat collection, might draw a laugh or a teasing reply. Some letters even included tiny drawings in the margins, a bird with a bowler hat, a cat chasing a mouse, or an exaggeratedly tall candle to punctuate jokes. You can't help but smirk imagining the recipient leaning over the letter, tilting it this way and that to fully appreciate the artistic detail and humorous nuance. The rhythm of writing mattered as much as the content. Long, flowing sentences might suggest a dreamy, contemplative mood, while short, clipped phrases indicated urgency or excitement. Timing also played into social games. Letters deliberately delayed could build anticipation, while rapid replies might demonstrate eagerness. You probably won't survive thinking about someone obsessively planning a letter's dispatch down to the day of the week and time of arrival, but that meticulous attention to timing amplified the emotional impact of each exchange. Quirky or unexpected inserts enhanced the experience. A pressed flower, a lock of hair, a folded note tucked inside another envelope, all served as tactile extensions of sentiment. Some women even included little poems or limericks balancing humor and romance. The sense of discovery when opening such a letter could rival modern-day surprises, a sudden thrill paired with warmth, amusement, and delight. Historians still debate how widespread these inclusions were, but surviving letters suggest the practice was more common than casual observers might expect. the act of reading itself became performative. Recipients might read aloud to themselves, memorizing lines, savoring turns of phrase, or imagining the writer's expressions as they penned each word. You picture someone clutching the paper to their chest, pausing to imagine the quill moving across the page, the hand slightly trembling with anticipation. Every letter was more than communication. It was a bridge, a game, a flirtation, and a tiny ritual. Even small mistakes added charm. A smudged letter, a misspelled word, or an accidentally inverted sentence could make the correspondence feel more human, more intimate. The imperfection reinforced that someone had spent time, attention, and emotion on you, crafting a message uniquely for your eyes. You probably won't survive thinking how today's spell-checked, auto-corrected texts lack that personal, imperfect magic, but that's exactly why the letters of the 1800s carried such emotional weight. You picture yourself in a sunlit parlour, the faint aroma of beeswax from polished furniture, mixing with the scent of lavender from a pressed flower tucked between the pages of a letter. Women in the 1800s understood that letters were multi-sensory experiences. Historians still argue whether scent was used deliberately to manipulate emotions or simply as a byproduct of household habits, but either way, it added a subtle intimacy that modern emails can't replicate. You probably won't survive imagining the careful perfuming of each sheet, the precise pressure applied to seals, and the anxiety of hoping the fragrance lasts until the recipient reads it. The language of flirtation was coded, yet sophisticated. Words often dance between complimentary and teasing, their tone decipherable only to those attuned to nuancy. You picture a sentence that reads on the surface as a polite observation about a recent social gathering, but actually conveys a hidden affection or playful criticism. Historians still debate whether these linguistic subtleties were universally understood or primarily enjoyed by the educated elite, but they certainly made reading letters a small intellectual adventure. Margins were prime real estate. Women doodled tiny sketches, wrote playful annotations, or added cryptic symbols, sometimes just to see if the recipient could catch their hidden meaning. A crescent moon in the corner might indicate longing, a tiny heart for amusement, or a small star for flirtation. You lean back, imagining someone tilting the paper, squinting at these marks as if they were hieroglyphs meant only for their eyes. The interplay between text and margin created a layered, immersive experience that modern messages can hardly emulate. Humour and wit remained central. Some letters contained riddles or word games, challenging the recipient to respond in kind. A joke about a clumsy acquaintance or a mischievous anecdote from a recent social event could elicit laughter and simultaneously demonstrate the writer's cleverness. You can almost hear the gentle chuckle as the recipient traces their finger over the lines, appreciating both the content and the craft. Letter writing also demanded performance discipline. The timing, style, and even the angle of the quill were part of the package. Some women wrote in near darkness to create dramatic shadows across the paper. Others used tiny, precise strokes to indicate careful attention. The act of writing itself became ritualized, a slow and deliberate process that amplified emotional resonance. You probably won't survive imagining the countless hours spent perfecting a single paragraph, balancing wit, affection, and charm. Secrecy added spice. Letters could be hidden in books, under cushions, or in hollowed-out objects, transforming ordinary spaces into clandestine communication hubs. A folded sheet placed just so might remain unnoticed by a parent or sibling, yet convey intimate sentiments to the intended recipient. Historians still debate how pervasive these concealment practices were, but the surviving letters hint at a world of subtle espionage within domestic life. By the time a letter was finally read, it had achieved its purpose: to amuse, tease, provoke thought, and elicit emotion. You imagine the recipient smiling, inhaling the faint perfume, tracing the loops of letters and discovering hidden flourishes, all while feeling an intimate connection across time and space. In these small paper worlds, flirtation became art, patience became pleasure, and writing became a gentle performance of mind and heart. You settle into a velvet-upholstered chair, imagining the gentle scratch of quill, against paper as a woman crafts her next note. Letters in the 1800s weren't merely functional. They were performances, miniature stage plays where the inked lines became actors in the drama of flirtation. Historians still argue whether the theatricality of these letters was intentional or an inevitable byproduct of social constraints, but either way, the effect was undeniable. You probably won't survive picturing someone carefully choosing words to appear witty, yet not forward, clever, yet not condescending, all while hoping their subtle cues land perfectly. Some women went so far as to vary handwriting styles within a single letter, switching from flowing cursive to delicate block letters to emphasize certain phrases or signal a change in tone. You can almost see the recipient squinting over the paper, deciphering the intentions behind each stylistic shift, feeling the thrill of intimacy conveyed through the curves and angles of ink. It was, in a sense, a private choreography, where the quill led the dance and the paper bore witness to the subtle flirtations. Humor was layered and often self-deprecating. A woman might jokingly critique her own cooking skills or exaggerate a minor social faux pas, creating an opening for shared laughter. You imagine someone reading, smiling at the absurdity, and feeling a gentle closeness to a person they may never see in person for weeks. This interplay of modesty, wit, and teasing was a hallmark of the correspondence, a delicate balancing act to maintain charm without overstepping societal boundaries. Quirky personal touches abounded. Some letters included tiny pressed petals or seeds which could sprout later if planted, leaving a living reminder of affection. Others folded their notes into intricate shapes, boats, birds, or geometric designs, turning communication into a tactile puzzle. Historians still debate whether these creative flourishes were common among all classes or mostly the province of the literate elite, but surviving examples reveal a world where artistry and emotion were intertwined. Timing remained a subtle weapon. A delayed reply could suggest measured contemplation or playful aloofness, while a swift response could signal eagerness. Even the envelope itself carried nuance. The choice of sealing wax color, the quality of the paper, and the neatness of the folds all spoke volumes. You probably won't survive thinking about someone agonizing over the shade of wax, debating whether crimson suggested passion or merely fashionable taste. The content often flirted with intellectual exchange, references to literature, philosophical musings, or commentary on the latest social trends created shared mental spaces, allowing the recipient to engage on a cerebral level. A single line could simultaneously entertain, challenge, and entice, making reading a multidimensional experience. You picture the recipient pausing to reflect, laugh quietly, and perhaps respond with equal subtlety, prolonging the game of intellect and emotion across days or weeks. By the time the letter is finished, folded, and sealed, it has become an artifact of personality, wit, and intention. You lean back, imagining the slow, deliberate journey through postal routes, the anticipation building each day until the recipient finally holds it in hand. In the world of 19th century flirtation, letters weren't just messages, they were experiences crafted to delight, intrigue, and bind hearts in suspenseful, ink-stained intimacy. You imagine a chilly morning, dew clinging to window panes, as a young woman hunches over a desk, quill poised, her breath misting in the frosty air. In the 1800s, letters weren't just words on paper, they were instruments of anticipation. Historians still argue whether the rituals surrounding letter writing were more about societal expectations or personal expression, but you can't deny the tension they created. You probably won't survive picturing someone agonizing over every phrase, knowing that a single misstep could confuse, amuse, or delight the recipient in unintended ways. The choice of stationery mattered almost as much as the words themselves. Heavy, cream-colored paper conveyed seriousness and elegance. Delicate, lightly scented sheets suggested intimacy. Some women even wrote on folded cards rather than full sheets, to create a sense of compactness, a message-in-a-box effect. You lean back and smile at the thought of someone selecting paper like a connoisseur of fine wine, considering texture, weight, and color to optimize emotional impact. Letters often contained tiny coded signals, A flourish under a signature, a dot in the margin, or a small star could indicate anything from affection to playful teasing. You probably won't survive imagining someone decoding these tiny marks, feeling a thrill when they correctly interpret the sender's subtle cues. Some women kept a personal guide of symbols, a private lexicon that only their chosen correspondent could fully understand, turning even casual communication into a game of intellect and intimacy. Humour seeped into every corner of correspondence. Witty observations about neighbours, minor social mishaps, or exaggerated complaints about mundane tasks made letters entertaining. You picture a recipient chuckling quietly over a tale of a runaway chicken or a misbehaving dog, appreciating the humour while feeling closer to the writer. These playful anecdotes reinforced bonds, showing personality without the need for overt declarations of affection. Timing played a strategic role. A letter sent to arrive on a specific day, a birthday, a Sunday afternoon, or during a social gathering, carried extra weight. Deliberate delays could heighten suspense or signal coyness, while immediate replies might show eagerness or attentiveness. Historians still debate whether these timing choices were mostly social strategy or personal expression, but in any case, they added layers of emotional complexity to the correspondence. Quirky inserts were common. A pressed flower, a tiny drawing, or even a folded paper figure could transform a simple note into a keepsake. You imagine a tiny origami swan tucked into an envelope, waiting to surprise the recipient, bridging distance with tactile charm. These personal touches made the act of opening a letter a multi-sensory experience, a slow unfolding of personality, wit, and desire. By the time the letter reached its destination, the carefully curated package of words, symbols, and small objects created a palpable emotional impact. You imagine the recipient holding it, savouring the texture of the paper, the scent of the ink, and the subtle humour woven through the lines. In the world of 19th century flirtation, a letter wasn't merely a message, it was an experience, a carefully choreographed dance of emotion, intellect, and anticipation that left both sender and receiver wrapped in a quiet, shared thrill. You picture a quiet afternoon, sunlight slanting through lace curtains, dust motes drifting lazily in the air, as a woman carefully folds a letter she has spent hours crafting. In the 1800s, the act of writing was as deliberate as a painter choosing each brushstroke. Historians still argue whether women viewed letters primarily as social obligation or as genuine instruments of flirtation, but the lines between the two were often beautifully blurred. You probably won't survive imagining someone adjusting the angle of the quill just so, ensuring each word conveys both meaning and charm. Marginalia played a secretive role. Tiny notes squeezed into corners, delicate sketches, or miniature symbols could transform an ordinary letter into a puzzle meant to intrigue. You imagine a small crescent moon or a playful swirl hidden among the text, a secret wink to the attentive reader. These coded messages allowed writers to flirt without risking public exposure, a subtle rebellion against the rigid social codes of the time. Historians still debate how widespread such marginalia truly were, but the surviving letters reveal a world where wit and subtlety thrived. Humour remained a crucial tool. Women might poke fun at themselves, exaggerate small misfortunes, or comment on trivial neighbourhood drama, drawing the reader into a playful narrative. You picture someone chuckling softly over an anecdote about a cousin's mismatched shoes or a clumsy dance at a recent gathering. These tiny shared moments of laughter strengthened connections, making the act of letter reading a deeply personal experience. Paper texture, ink shade, and penmanship all contributed to emotional impact. Thick, creamy paper suggested seriousness, delicate, lightly scented sheets whispered intimacy. A faint smudge or slight variation in ink could indicate hurried excitement or nervous anticipation. You lean back and imagine a recipient leaning over the page, tilting it this way and that to catch every nuance, every hint of emotion encoded in the hand-crafted letters. Strategic timing added intrigue. A note arriving during a social visit or on a particular day carried additional meaning. Delayed replies could imply coyness, measured thought, or playful teasing, while prompt responses suggested eagerness. You probably won't survive picturing the writer calculating dispatch and delivery to orchestrate maximum effect, a slow, deliberate manipulation of anticipation and desire. Quirky inclusions were common: pressed flowers, tiny drawings, or folded paper figures elevated letters from mere communication to tactile art. You imagine an origami crane tucked inside, waiting to surprise and delight, turning a simple letter into a miniature treasure. These details reinforced the sense that the sender had invested time, thought, and affection into crafting the correspondence. By the time a letter was received, it had transformed. Each page, symbol, and folded edge carried emotion, wit, and intelligence. You picture the recipient savoring every detail, inhaling the faint scent of ink and pressed petals, tracing each flourish with their fingers. In 19th century flirtation, letters weren't just messages, they were immersive experiences carefully orchestrated to entertain, entice, and forge a private connection that could stretch across weeks and miles. You sink into the familiar rhythm of the afternoon, the distant clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones providing a gentle percussion as you picture a woman dipping her quill into ink once more. In the 1800s, letters were arenas for both wit and subtle power. Historians still argue whether the emotional labor of letter writing reinforced societal roles or quietly subverted them, but either way, women wielded remarkable influence through ink-stained fingers. You probably won't survive picturing the delicate balancing act of expressing interest without transgressing propriety, of flirting with precision that would make a modern text message seem clumsy. The art of anticipation was carefully cultivated. Women sometimes referenced events they had not yet attended, teasingly hinting at stories the recipient would only hear later, ensuring the next letter would be eagerly awaited. You imagine someone reading a cryptic line about a ballroom mishap, eyebrows raised, heart skipping a beat, wondering how much truth lies in the playful exaggeration. The suspense was part of the thrill, a slow, burning connection maintained across weeks or even months. Humor remained both a shield and a lure. A playful jab at a mutual acquaintance or a light-hearted description of daily chores could serve multiple purposes: entertaining, revealing personality, and subtly demonstrating intelligence. You can picture the recipient leaning forward, a wry smile curling their lips, feeling a small but genuine intimacy through the shared laughter. Historians still debate whether these humorous insertions were consciously strategic or simply natural extensions of personality, but their effect on the reader was undeniably powerful. Coded language extended beyond symbols in the margins. Phrases with double meanings borrowed from literature or popular songs became a private lexicon between correspondents. A single line could be a compliment, a tease, or a challenge, depending on context. You probably won't survive imagining someone rereading a passage multiple times, savoring the ambiguity, and pondering the intended tone. Was it jest, affection, or both simultaneously? Physical presentation was as much part of the message as the words themselves. Paperweight, the neatness of folds, and the evenness of ink strokes conveyed conscientiousness and attention. A slightly uneven flourish might suggest nervous excitement. A deliberate choice of colored ink could signal sentiment. You lean back and picture the recipient holding the letter at an angle, squinting to catch subtle clues, feeling the intimacy of careful craftsmanship bridging the distance. Quirky touches abounded. Some letters included miniature sketches, pressed petals, or folded paper shapes, transforming correspondence into a tactile experience. You imagine a tiny folded heart hidden within the folds awaiting discovery, each element a whisper of personality and intention. These details turned reading into an immersive ritual, where every touch and observation deepened connection. By the end of the process, letters were more than communication. They were performances, rituals, and repositories of emotion. You can almost hear the quiet sigh as a recipient closes the note, tracing each curve of inked letters with a finger, inhaling the subtle scent of pressed flowers, and feeling a bond that spans both space and time. In the world of 19th century flirtation, letter writing was not mere correspondence. It was a carefully orchestrated dance of intellect, affection, and anticipation that left both sender and receiver suspended in shared delight. You picture a late afternoon sun filtering through the tall windows of a drawing room, dust motes drifting lazily as a woman dips her quill into ink, ready to compose another letter. In the 1800s, letters were not just functional, they were performances, intimate scripts designed to captivate, tease, and occasionally scandalize. Historians still argue whether the precise art of letter writing reinforced social norms or quietly undermined them, but either way, women wielded a subtle, potent form of influence. You probably won't survive imagining someone agonizing over the difference between affectionately yours and yours most sincerely, knowing that nuance could shape the entire tone of the exchange. The language itself was a delicate game. Double entendre and literary references allowed a writer to flirt while maintaining propriety. A single quote from Byron or a line of Shakespeare could carry layers of meaning, romantic, playful, or intellectually suggestive, interpreted only by the perceptive recipient. You picture the reader pausing, savouring the phrasing, mentally unpacking the hidden cues, and perhaps even smiling at the cleverness. These letters were less about content and more about shared experience, a private dance of wit and subtlety. Humour often served as a bridge, softening flirtation with light-hearted observation. A tale of a neighbour's runaway dog or a clumsy servant might appear trivial, but it provided a space for laughter, mutual understanding, and gentle teasing. You can almost hear the quiet chuckle that accompanies such reading, the warm sense of connection that builds without physical presence. Historians still debate how conscious these humorous insertions were, whether calculated to charm or simply natural extensions of personality, but they undeniably enriched correspondence. The visual and tactile presentation mattered enormously. Heavy cream-coloured paper suggested formality. Delicate scented sheets hinted at intimacy, and elaborate folds or seals could convey playful attention to detail. Quirks like tiny sketches, folded paper figures, or pressed petals elevated letters from mere words to sensory experiences you probably won't survive, picturing someone carefully selecting the wax seal colour, weighing whether crimson signified passion or simply fashion sense. Timing remained a strategic tool. A letter sent to arrive on a particular day, Sunday afternoon, a social gathering, or a notable date, added layers of meaning. Delayed replies could imply coyness or playful teasing, while prompt responses might suggest eagerness or attentiveness. Each letter became a carefully orchestrated rhythm of communication, stretching anticipation and creating a shared temporal experience. By the time a letter reached its recipient, it had become more than ink on paper. It was a vessel of emotion, wit, intellect, and artistry. You can picture the quiet ritual of opening the envelope, inhaling the subtle scent of ink and flowers, tracing each carefully penned curve with a fingertip, and feeling the invisible connection across time and distance. In 19th century flirtation, letters weren't just communication, they were immersive, emotionally charged experiences that bound hearts and minds in a slow, enchanting dance of anticipation. You imagine the soft rustle of parchment as a letter is unfolded on a quiet evening, candlelight flickering across the inked words, the scent of lavender drifting from the paper. In the 1800s, the letter itself was an intimate object, carefully curated to convey not just words but mood, intention, and personality. Historians still argue whether the meticulous rituals surrounding letter writing were more about social performance or authentic emotional expression. But the layers of meaning were undeniable. You probably won't survive picturing someone trembling slightly, hand-poised, debating whether a small flourish at the end of a sentence signals subtle affection or risks misinterpretation. Marginal notes were common, tiny secrets tucked into corners that could transform an ordinary letter into a private puzzle. A dot here, a star there, a flourish under a word. These subtle gestures whispered messages only the attentive recipient would catch. You imagine a reader leaning in, squinting at the faint symbols, deciphering hidden meanings, and feeling the quiet thrill of being let in on a secret. Scholars still debate how consistent these codes were, but surviving letters suggest that playfulness and intellect were intertwined in the art of correspondence. Humor continued to play a crucial role. A woman might exaggerate minor mishaps, a burnt loaf of bread, a wayward cat, or a neighbor's social blunder, to evoke laughter while demonstrating wit. You picture the recipient chuckling quietly, savoring each anecdote, the laughter forming a bridge across distance and time. These small, playful inserts were not just entertainment. They were intimacy in disguise, a way to show personality without overtly declaring affection. Paper and presentation carried subtle meaning. Creamy, thick sheets suggested seriousness. Delicate, scented papers whispered flirtation. The quill's flow, ink color, and even the fold of the letter communicated care and attention. You probably won't survive imagining a tiny pressed flower tucked inside, waiting to be discovered, each choice amplifying the emotional impact of the letter. Timing was yet another layer of strategy. A note might be sent to coincide with a specific social event or day of importance, heightening suspense and signaling attentiveness. Delayed letters could tease, prompt curiosity, or gently chide, while quick replies hinted at enthusiasm and engagement. Historians still debate whether these timing tactics were conscious maneuvers or simple reflections of social rhythm, but they undeniably shaped the emotional resonance of correspondence. By the time the letter arrived, it was more than words. It was an experience. You picture the recipient unfolding the sheet with care, inhaling the faint scent of ink and petals, tracing delicate lines with fingertips, and feeling the invisible thread of connection stretch across miles. In 19th century flirtation, each letter was a meticulously orchestrated ballet of emotion, wit, and subtlety, drawing sender and recipient into a shared, intimate dance that transcended distance. You picture the afternoon sun spilling over a writing desk, warming the paper as a woman begins to craft her latest letter. In the 1800s, letters were carefully constructed performances, blending social expectation with personal expression. Historians still argue whether the precision of etiquette surrounding letter writing empowered women or reinforced restrictive norms, but either way, mastery of the quill offered a subtle avenue of influence. You probably won't survive imagining someone erasing a single word multiple times, weighing its potential impact, knowing that each phrase could enchant or alienate the reader. Literary allusions were a secret weapon. Quoting poetry or a line from a popular novel allowed the writer to signal intellect, taste, and emotional depth. You imagine the recipient leaning closer to the page, delighting in the layers of meaning embedded in a simple reference, feeling the thrill of recognition and understanding. Scholars still debate how widely these references were understood beyond educated circles, but the letters that survive show a sophisticated interplay between cultural knowledge and personal sentiment. Humor maintained its quiet dominance. A clever anecdote about a neighborhood mishap, a playful exaggeration, or a witty remark about society's absurdities could soften flirtation and demonstrate intelligence. You picture the reader chuckling softly, perhaps spilling tea or shifting uncomfortably in their chair as they navigate the delicate humor meant to entertain without offending. These moments of shared amusement became threads of intimacy, a private world of laughter woven between sender and recipient. The tactile and visual qualities of letters were essential. Thick, creamy paper, carefully chosen ink, delicate folds and small sketches or pressed flowers, all elevated correspondence from mere words to art. You probably won't survive picturing a tiny pressed violet tucked between pages, its scent faint yet evocative, transforming the act of reading into an immersive sensory experience. Timing added intrigue, a letter arriving on a Sunday morning, a festive day, or after a social event carried layered meanings. A delayed response might imply coyness or playful restraint, while a prompt one suggested eagerness. Historians still debate whether this timing was consciously strategic or simply reflective of social rhythms, but the effect on the reader was undeniable, heightening anticipation and emotional connection. Letters were ultimately immersive performances. You imagine the recipient holding the page, tracing the curves of the handwriting, inhaling the delicate scent of ink and pressed petals, savoring every nuance. In the world of 19th century flirtation, letters were far more than messages. They were carefully crafted experiences, dances of intellect, humor, and emotion that connected hearts across distance and time. You lean back in your chair and picture a quiet parlor, the warm glow of a late afternoon sun spilling across the room as a woman picks up her quill, preparing to send another carefully constructed message. In the 1800s, letters were not mere words. They were arenas of subtle persuasion, charm, and personal theater. Historians still argue whether the meticulous etiquette surrounding letter writing empowered women or reinforced societal limitations, but the act itself offered an undeniable avenue of influence. You probably won't survive imagining someone agonizing over the placement of a single comma, knowing that its presence or absence could alter the perceived sentiment of a declaration. Secret codes and playful symbols peppered correspondence, turning a simple note into a private puzzle. Dashes, stars, underlined words, or even a peculiar choice of ink could carry hidden messages. You picture a recipient leaning in, tracing the lines with fingertips, decoding what might be jest, subtle compliment, or unspoken invitation. Scholars still debate the consistency of these codes, but surviving letters suggest a complex network of shared understanding, a secret language that allowed intimacy to flourish under the strict gaze of propriety. Humor remained a cornerstone. A minor social blunder, a misbehaving pet, or an exaggerated domestic mishap provided amusement and a gentle showcase of personality. You can almost hear the quiet chuckle of someone reading a letter aloud to themselves, the laughter rippling softly through an otherwise silent room, a bridge of shared amusement connecting distant lives. This blend of wit and playfulness allowed flirtation to exist in a socially acceptable form, where intellect and charm were as potent as physical presence. The physicality of letters mattered. Creamy, heavy paper conveyed seriousness, while scented sheets suggested intimacy. Elaborate folds, pressed flowers, or tiny sketches transformed correspondence into an immersive sensory experience. You probably won't survive picturing a delicate fold hiding a tiny heart, or a carefully pressed violet tucked between pages, each detail enhancing the emotional resonance of the communication. Timing was strategic, adding layers to the exchange. A letter arriving on a particular day, a Sunday, a social gathering, or a holiday could suggest thoughtfulness or playful teasing. A delayed reply might imply coyness or intentional restraint, while a prompt response indicated attentiveness and eagerness. Historians still debate whether these timing tactics were deliberate maneuvers or reflections of societal rhythm, but they undeniably shaped the anticipation and emotional intensity of the correspondence. By the time a letter reached its recipient, it had become more than ink on paper. It was an experience. You imagine the reader carefully opening the envelope, inhaling the faint scent of ink and petals, tracing each graceful curve of handwriting, and savoring the invisible connection across distance. In the world of 19th century flirtation, letters were a delicate interplay of wit, emotion, and strategy, bridging hearts and minds in an elaborate, enchanting dance. You picture the soft scratching of a quill against paper, each line curling gracefully, the faint scent of ink mingling with the lavender tucked between the folds. In the 1800s, women mastered the subtlety of letter writing, transforming simple correspondence into intricate dances of emotion and intellect. Historians still argue whether these carefully constructed letters genuinely reflected personal desire or were simply exercises in social theatre, but the results were undeniably captivating. You probably won't survive imagining someone agonizing over word choice, knowing a single misplaced phrase could signal bold affection or polite restraint. Secret symbolism played a vital role. A small star drawn beside a sentence, a dot under a word, or a slight flourish at the end of a paragraph could communicate private messages intelligible only to the initiated. You can almost see a recipient tracing these marks with a fingertip, decoding each hidden meaning with quiet excitement. Scholars still debate the consistency and intent behind these symbols, but surviving correspondence suggests an entire covert language thrived in plain sight, turning mundane letters into playful mysteries. Humor and wit remained essential tools. A story of a neighbor's runaway goose, a botched meal, or an accidental slip of the servant offered light-hearted amusement while subtly showcasing intellect. You probably won't survive picturing the reader chuckling quietly, feeling the warmth of shared amusement, and experiencing a connection that bridged miles without physical presence. This gentle humor allowed flirtation to thrive in socially acceptable forms, where cleverness could impress as much as beauty or status. The paper itself spoke volumes. Creamy, thick sheets indicated formality, while delicate, scented paper whispered intimacy. Elaborate folds, carefully chosen ink colors, and even pressed flowers elevated letters to multi-sensory experiences. You imagine the recipient discovering a tiny folded heart or a pale violet, each detail meticulously crafted to deepen engagement and intrigue. Timing was an art. A letter arriving on a Sunday afternoon, a festive occasion, or following a notable social event carried layered meanings. Delayed replies could suggest coyness or playful teasing, while prompt responses indicated attentiveness and interest. Historians still debate whether these timing strategies were conscious manipulations or reflections of societal norms, but their impact on emotional resonance was significant. By the moment the envelope was opened, the letter had transcended mere communication. You can picture the reader holding it gently, inhaling the faint aroma of ink and petals, and tracing each curving letter with fingertips. In 19th century flirtation, letters were immersive experiences weaving wit, emotion, and subtle strategy into a dance that connected minds and hearts across distance. You picture a quiet afternoon, sunlight slanting across a polished wooden desk, as a woman carefully lays out sheets of creamy paper. In the 1800s, letters were not mere messages, they were performances of personality, intelligence, and charm. Historians still argue whether these exchanges empowered women within restrictive social norms or simply reinforced societal expectations. But the subtle power of the pen is undeniable. You probably won't survive imagining someone agonizing over whether yours most sincerely carried just enough warmth without hinting at impropriety. The play of symbols and codes remained central. A small flourish beneath a word, a star in the margin, or an exaggerated loop on a letter could convey hidden meanings only perceptible to the attentive reader. You can almost see someone leaning in, tracing these tiny marks with a fingertip, decoding messages that could be affectionate, teasing, or mischievous. Scholars still debate the extent to which these codes were standardized versus improvised, but surviving letters show a complex, nuanced system of secret communication thriving beneath the polite veneer of society. Humor was essential for maintaining intimacy without overstepping propriety. A tale of a clumsy servant, a misbehaving dog, or a minor household disaster allowed playful teasing and gentle engagement. You probably won't survive picturing a recipient chuckling softly, sharing a private smile with someone miles away, and feeling the quiet thrill of understanding the writer's cleverness. Humor became a bridge, enabling flirtation, camaraderie, and wit to coexist within socially acceptable boundaries. The physical presentation of a letter was a subtle art. Cream-colored, heavy stock suggested formality. Delicate, scented papers hinted at intimacy. Elaborate folds, pressed flowers, and tiny sketches turned correspondence into a multisensory experience. You imagine the recipient carefully unfolding a sheet, inhaling the faint scent of petals, and noticing a tiny illustration tucked into the corner, each element enhancing emotional resonance. Timing, too, was part of the strategy. Letters arriving on specific days, Sunday afternoons, holidays, or following social events, carried additional meaning. A delayed reply could signal coyness or playful teasing, while a quick response conveyed eagerness. Historians still debate whether this timing was deliberate or merely a reflection of social rhythm, but it undeniably amplified anticipation, weaving suspense and connection into the written word. By the time a letter reached its recipient, it had become a full experience. You can picture someone holding the page, tracing each curve with a fingertip, inhaling the delicate scent, and feeling the invisible thread linking sender and receiver. In 19th century flirtation, letters were intricate dances of emotion, wit, and subtlety, uniting hearts and minds across distance with a gentle, intoxicating intimacy. You imagine a quiet evening, the soft crackle of a fire in the hearth, as a woman sets her inkwell beside a stack of creamy paper. In the 1800s, letter writing was a delicate art, combining intellect, charm, and careful self-presentation. Historians still argue whether the strict etiquette surrounding correspondence constrained genuine emotion or subtly empowered women to navigate social hierarchies, but the letters themselves speak volumes about personality and intent. You probably won't survive picturing someone erasing and rewriting the same sentence repeatedly, trying to strike the perfect balance between wit, sentiment, and propriety. The use of secret symbols and subtle cues added layers of meaning. A tiny dot, a carefully curved flourish, or an unusual underlining could hint at affection, humor, or playful mischief. You can almost see a recipient leaning in, fingers tracing the paper, deciphering messages that would remain invisible to anyone else. Scholars still debate the universality of these codes, whether they were widely understood or personalized per relationship. But surviving letters suggest a nuanced, often sophisticated system of covert communication. Humor remained an essential tool for connection. Tales of a clumsy maid, a mischievous pet, or an overzealous neighbor created shared amusement, subtly demonstrating cleverness. You probably won't survive picturing a reader stifling a laugh in a silent parlor, enjoying the private jokes embedded in inked words. These moments of levity bridged distance and made flirtation socially acceptable, allowing affection to flourish in indirect, playful ways. The materiality of the letter mattered immensely. Thick, creamy sheets conveyed formality, while delicate, scented papers suggested intimacy. The choice of ink, the careful folding, even the inclusion of a tiny pressed flower elevated correspondence to a multisensory experience. You imagine the recipient noticing a subtle sketch in the margin or the faint fragrance of lavender, each element enhancing the emotional resonance of the note. Timing was strategic. A letter arriving on a particular day, a Sunday, a festival, or after a notable social event, carried layered meaning. A delayed response could suggest coyness or tease curiosity, while a prompt reply indicated enthusiasm and attentiveness. Historians still debate whether this timing was consciously manipulated or merely reflective of social norms, but its influence on anticipation and emotional engagement is clear. By the moment the envelope is open, the letter transcends words. You picture the recipient unfolding the paper, tracing each curve of elegant handwriting, inhaling the faint scent of ink and pressed petals, and feeling a connection that stretches across miles. In 19th century flirtation, letters were immersive experiences, intricate dances of wit, subtlety, and emotion binding hearts and minds in delicate intimacy. You picture a sun-drenched morning, the faint scent of coffee mingling with ink, as a woman sits by a lace-curtained window, poised to pen another letter. In the 1800s, letter writing was more than a habit. It was a performance, a dance of intellect, emotion, and social tact. Historians still argue whether the formality of etiquette restricted genuine expression or secretly gave women agency within rigid societal norms, but the impact of a well-crafted letter was undeniable. You probably won't survive imagining someone agonizing over whether "I remain yours faithfully" sounded sincere or just slightly coquettish. Hidden symbols and subtle flourishes conveyed meaning beyond words. A tiny heart drawn in the margin, a flourish under a carefully chosen word, or even the choice of ink color could signal interest, amusement, or gentle teasing. You can almost see the recipient holding the letter close, tracing each mark with a fingertip, decoding private messages hidden beneath the surface. Scholars still debate whether these signs were standardized or improvised, but surviving correspondence suggests an intricate language of flirtation existed beneath the veil of propriety. Humor was a critical tool, a story of a neighbor's dog causing chaos, a clumsy servant spilling tea, or a minor domestic mishap offered playful engagement while showcasing intelligence and wit. You probably won't survive picturing a recipient chuckling quietly, feeling the subtle thrill of shared amusement and sensing a connection that transcended distance. Humor allowed flirtation to flourish in socially acceptable ways, blending charm, intellect, and light-heartedness. The tactile qualities of letters enhanced the experience. Cream-colored, thick paper conveyed seriousness, while delicate, scented sheets hinted at intimacy. Pressed flowers, sketches, or decorative folds transformed letters into sensory experiences. You imagine the recipient carefully unfolding a page, inhaling the faint aroma, and noticing a tiny embellishment in the margin, each detail deepening engagement and intrigue. Timing added another layer of meaning. A letter arriving on a Sunday afternoon after a social gathering or on a festival day could suggest thoughtfulness or playful restraint. A delayed response might indicate coyness, while a prompt reply conveyed attentiveness. Historians still debate whether these timing strategies were deliberate or merely reflective of social routines, but their effect on anticipation and emotional intensity was undeniable. By the moment the envelope is opened, the letter becomes a living experience. You picture the reader tracing each curve of elegant handwriting, inhaling subtle scents, and feeling an invisible connection bridging miles. In 19th century flirtation, letters were not just communication, they were intricate, immersive dances of wit, emotion, and subtle persuasion, drawing hearts and minds closer across time and distance. You imagine a dimly lit parlor, curtains drawn against the late afternoon sun, where a young woman carefully selects her writing materials. In the 1800s, letters were an art form, a way to project personality, intelligence, and subtle charm into a distant hand. Historians still argue whether the rigorous etiquette governing correspondence limited authentic emotion or provided women a rare avenue of influence, but the letters themselves reveal a striking blend of calculation and heart. You probably won't survive picturing someone obsessively debating whether a single word, dearest, truly, or yours sincerely, struck the right balance of affection and propriety. Secret codes remained essential to these exchanges. Small flourishes beneath letters, ink smudges, underlines, or marginalia could signal playful teasing, hidden sentiment, or flirtatious interest. You can almost see the recipient leaning forward, tracing each mark with a fingertip, deciphering messages invisible to anyone else. Scholars still debate whether these codes were widely understood or idiosyncratic, but surviving correspondence reveals a rich, covert language that allowed intimacy to flourish within social constraints. Humor and gentle satire added life to letters. Anecdotes of a neighbor's accidental mishaps, a runaway horse, or a mischievous child allowed women to display wit while engaging their correspondence. You probably won't survive picturing someone quietly chuckling to themselves, enjoying a private joke embedded in careful prose, savoring the sense of shared understanding. These light-hearted elements made flirtation socially acceptable, a dance of intellect and charm without overt impropriety. The physicality of letters was deliberately expressive. Cream-colored sheets implied formality. Delicate scented papers whispered intimacy, and careful folds or pressed flowers elevated correspondence into a sensory experience. You imagine the recipient slowly opening the envelope, inhaling the faint fragrance of lavender, and noticing a subtle sketch tucked in the corner, each detail enhancing the emotional weight of the letter. Timing played a strategic role. Letters delivered on Sundays, holidays, or after notable social events carried implicit meaning. Delayed replies could signal coyness, while prompt responses conveyed attentiveness and eagerness. Historians still debate whether these timing nuances were deliberate strategies or mere reflections of social rhythm, but their impact on anticipation and emotional resonance was clear. By the time a letter reached its intended hand, it had become an immersive experience. You picture the reader unfolding each page with care, following the elegant curves of handwriting, inhaling the soft scent, and feeling a bridge of understanding and affection stretching across distance. In 19th century flirtation, letters were not simply messages, they were carefully crafted performances of emotion, wit, and strategy, binding hearts and minds in subtle intimacy. You picture a rainy afternoon, the gentle patter of drops against the window pane, providing a rhythmic backdrop as a woman dips her quill into ink, ready to compose another letter. In the 1800s, correspondence was a delicate and deliberate practice, a way to craft emotion and intellect into a tangible form. Historians still argue whether the strict conventions of letter writing truly reflected personal feelings or were primarily a display of social acumen. But the thrill of reading or sending a carefully worded note is undeniable. You probably won't survive imagining someone pacing the room, debating whether a single word might betray too much eagerness or seem too aloof. The subtle language of symbols persisted. A dot over a letter, a curving underline, or a tiny star in the margin could communicate affection, teasing, or curiosity, invisible to the casual eye. You can almost see a recipient leaning closer, fingers hovering over the marks, decoding each carefully hidden message. Scholars still debate whether these codes were standardized or entirely personal, but the surviving letters reveal a fascinating network of covert communication that allowed flirtation to flourish even within restrictive social rules. Humor softened the constraints. Light-hearted stories about clumsy servants, eccentric neighbors, or runaway pets provided amusement while demonstrating intelligence and wit. You probably won't survive picturing someone quietly laughing in a quiet parlor, feeling a subtle, private connection to the writer. Humor became a socially safe way to express charm, bridging the gap between propriety and personal intimacy. The materiality of a letter carried meaning. Thick, cream-colored paper signaled formality, while delicate, perfumed sheets suggested closeness. Pressed flowers, sketches, and artistic folds elevated the letter to a sensory experience. You imagine the recipient carefully unfolding the page, inhaling the soft aroma of ink and petals, and noting the faint flourish in the corner, details that added depth to the emotional message. Timing enhanced the subtlety. A letter arriving on a Sunday afternoon, after a gathering or following a special occasion, could carry layered implications. A delayed response might hint at playful coyness, while a quick reply conveyed attentiveness and genuine interest. Historians still debate whether timing was strategically employed or simply reflected social routine, but it undeniably shaped anticipation and emotional connection. When the envelope is finally opened, the letter transforms from words on paper into a living experience. You picture the recipient tracing elegant script with their fingertips, breathing in faint scents and feeling a bridge of shared sentiment spanning distance and time. In the 19th century, letters were not merely communication, they were immersive dances of wit, strategy, and emotion, binding hearts and minds across space in subtle, intimate ways. You picture a dimly lit room, the soft flicker of a candle casting shadows across a desk, cluttered with paper, ink, and a small vial of fragrant lavender. In the 1800s, writing a letter was almost ritualistic, a performance of intellect, wit, and subtle charm. Historians still debate whether these letters truly reflected personal sentiment or were a form of social theatre, but you can't deny the thrill of seeing emotion meticulously encoded in ink. You probably won't survive imagining someone meticulously choosing each word, rewriting entire passages just to get the balance of flirtation, humor, and propriety exactly right. The playful use of symbols persisted. Tiny flourishes, a dash in the margin, or a carefully curved letter could carry nuanced meaning, interest, teasing, or affectionate curiosity, known only to the intended reader. You can almost feel the recipient leaning over the paper, tracing each mark with a fingertip, decoding these subtle cues. Scholars still argue about whether these signs were part of a widely understood system or purely private inventions, but the letters that survive reveal a surprisingly sophisticated language of flirtation. Humor served as an essential lubricant for intimacy. Tales of a clumsy maid spilling tea, a mischievous dog upsetting the table, or an overly enthusiastic neighbor provided amusement and allowed women to showcase wit. You probably won't survive picturing the recipient stifling a giggle, secretly enjoying a private joke across miles, and feeling a quiet thrill of connection. Such light-hearted elements made flirtation socially permissible, blending charm, intellect, and playful teasing. The physical presentation mattered as much as the words themselves. Thick, cream-colored paper implied formality, delicate scented sheets hinted at closeness, and pressed flowers or sketches turned the correspondence into a multi-sensory experience. You imagine the recipient slowly unfolding the page, inhaling the soft aroma, noticing the faint embellishment in the margin, and feeling the subtle impact of each carefully chosen detail. Timing added another layer of sophistication. Letters arriving on Sundays after social events or during holidays could imply thoughtfulness or playful restraint. A delayed response might signal coyness or anticipation, while a prompt reply suggested eagerness and attentiveness. Historians still debate whether these nuances were deliberate strategies or mere reflection of social routines, but their effect on expectation and emotional resonance was unmistakable. By the time the envelope is opened, the letter becomes a living, immersive experience. You picture the reader following elegant script with fingers and eyes, inhaling faint fragrances, and sensing the invisible connection linking sender and receiver. In the 19th century, letters were not merely messages, they were subtle, immersive performances of emotion, wit, and strategy, drawing hearts and minds together across distance in a delicate and intimate dance. You picture a quiet study, the late afternoon sun filtering through sheer curtains, highlighting the slight shimmer of ink on thick paper as a woman dips her quill. In the 1800s, letters were more than mere communication. They were carefully constructed instruments of social navigation. Historians still debate whether the strict rules of letter writing restricted genuine emotion or, paradoxically, provided women a unique form of agency, a way to influence hearts and minds across distance. You probably won't survive imagining someone erasing a perfectly good sentence multiple times, agonizing over whether "I remain sincerely yours" sounded too eager or just faintly teasing. Secret codes and subtle flourishes were the unsung heroes of correspondence. A tiny dot, a looping flourish, or the angle of a particular letter could hint at desire, mischief, or intellectual rapport. You can almost picture the recipient leaning forward, fingertips tracing marks, decoding these invisible messages. Scholars still argue whether these symbols were widely understood or personalized for each relationship, but surviving letters suggest a sophisticated, covert language that enabled intimate connections under the guise of propriety. Humor remained a critical ingredient. Playful anecdotes about a mischievous cat, a neighbor's clumsy mishaps, or a domestic faux pas not only entertained, but allowed women to demonstrate wit and intelligence. You probably won't survive picturing someone chuckling quietly, alone in a parlor, savoring the cleverness woven into the prose, and enjoying a subtle, private thrill of connection. Humor was a socially acceptable vehicle for flirtation, allowing affection to bloom within the constraints of decorum. The tactile and aesthetic qualities of letters were equally important. Creamy, thick sheets conveyed seriousness, while delicate, scented papers whispered intimacy. A pressed flower, a delicate sketch, or an unusual fold transformed a letter into a multi-sensory experience. You imagine a recipient carefully opening the envelope, inhaling the faint fragrance, and noticing the small embellishments that made each letter unique. Timing was a strategic element in correspondence. A letter arriving on a Sunday afternoon, following a festival, or after a significant social event carried unspoken implications. A delayed response could signal coyness or playful restraint, while a prompt reply suggested attentiveness and keen interest. Historians still debate whether timing was consciously manipulated or simply a product of routine, but its impact on anticipation and emotional resonance was undeniable. By the time the envelope is unfolded, the letter transcends its physical form. You picture the recipient tracing elegant script, inhaling faint scents, and sensing a connection that bridges miles. In 19th century flirtation, letters were more than words. They were immersive, intimate performances, intricate dances of wit, emotion, and subtle persuasion, binding hearts across time and space. You picture the quiet anticipation in the sitting room, the faint aroma of candle wax mixing with the scent of freshly pressed paper as a letter waits to be opened. In the 1800s, letters were not just written, they were performed, each word, flourish, and margin carefully considered. Historians still debate whether this meticulous crafting reflected true emotion or a socially sanctioned artifice, but the thrill of sending and receiving correspondence was undeniable. You probably won't survive imagining someone anxiously adjusting the angle of their handwriting, debating whether a simple "yours truly" carried the right hint of intrigue. Letters were coded performances layered with meaning. A looped flourish here, a faint underline there, a peculiar dot above a letter. Each conveyed subtle signals of humor, interest, or playful teasing. You can almost see the recipient leaning closer, examining every curve and mark, translating these symbols into emotion. Scholars still argue whether there was a standardized language of ink, or if each set of correspondents developed their own system, but surviving letters reveal a delicate and sophisticated network of flirtation, sometimes rivaling the intricacies of courtship rituals themselves. Humor provided a socially safe pathway for intimacy. Tales of runaway pets, bungling servants, or a neighbor's eccentric behavior allowed women to demonstrate intelligence and wit while fostering a private connection. You probably won't survive picturing someone quietly laughing in the solitude of their parlor, savoring the cleverness of a writer miles away, and feeling a subtle thrill of emotional closeness. Playful anecdotes bridged the gap between propriety and personal engagement, allowing flirtation to unfold in socially permissible ways. The materiality of the letters mattered. Creamy, heavy paper implied formality. Delicate scented sheets whispered intimacy. Embellishments like pressed flowers, delicate sketches, or ornate folds made each letter a multi-sensory experience. You imagine a recipient gently unfolding the envelope, inhaling the faint perfume, noting the tiny decorative touches, each detail deepening the emotional impact of the words within. Timing added nuance to correspondence. Letters arriving after a social gathering, on a holiday, or during a festival could suggest attentiveness, thoughtfulness, or playful coyness. A delayed reply might indicate restraint or teasing, while a prompt response implied genuine interest. Historians still debate whether these timing strategies were consciously employed or naturally aligned with social routines, but their effect on suspense and emotional connection was unmistakable. By the moment the envelope is opened, the letter becomes a living experience. You picture the reader tracing elegant script, inhaling faint scents, and feeling an invisible bridge connecting hearts across space. In the 19th century, letters were more than messages. They were immersive performances of emotion, wit, and subtle strategy, binding distant souls in a quiet, intimate dance. You feel the soft hush of twilight settling over a small parlor, the warm glow of a candle flickering across a polished wooden desk. In the 1800s, this was the stage for flirtation conducted through ink and paper, where a young woman carefully penned her thoughts, aware that every curve of the quill could carry more than words. Historians still debate whether these elaborate letters were genuine expressions of feeling or primarily exercises in social dexterity, but the letters themselves suggest a vibrant, emotionally rich world. You probably won't survive imagining someone agonizing over whether a single word, dearest, truly, or ever yours, might betray too much passion or too little restraint. The codes and subtle marks persisted until the very end. A tiny star in the margin, a flourish beneath a signature, or a slightly tilted loop could signal coyness, teasing, or deep affection. You can almost see the recipient leaning over the page, tracing each mark with delicate fingers, deciphering the hidden language that only they were meant to understand. Scholars still debate whether these symbols were common knowledge or private inventions, but surviving letters suggest a nuanced network of unspoken communication that allowed intimacy to flourish within societal constraints. Humor, gentle and sly, was often interwoven. Anecdotes of clumsy servants, runaway pets, or neighbors' eccentricities offered amusement and allowed women to display wit. You probably won't survive picturing someone stifling a giggle, reading alone by candlelight, savoring the cleverness and warmth of the writer's personality. Humor became a socially safe bridge, connecting hearts and minds without stepping over the strict boundaries of propriety. The physical aspects of letters, the texture of paper, the scent of ink, the pressed flowers tucked inside, transformed them into sensory experiences. You imagine unfolding the envelope carefully, inhaling a faint perfume, noticing the gentle embellishments, each detail contributing to the letter's emotional resonance. Timing, too, remained essential. Letters sent on specific days after gatherings or following notable events carried layered meaning. A delayed reply could indicate coyness, while a prompt response suggested eagerness and attentiveness. Historians still debate whether timing was a conscious strategy or a reflection of routine, but its impact on anticipation and connection was undeniable. And now, as you set aside the quill and rest your hands, the world of 19th century letters gently fades. The thrill, the cleverness, the subtle codes, and the quiet humor linger in the mind like the soft glow of a dying candle. Each letter was more than ink on paper. It was a delicate, intimate performance, an enduring dance of hearts, intellects, and unspoken longing. The room is quiet, the candle's flicker softens, and you feel the gentle, lingering echo of connections forged across distance and time. Now you let the day's imaginings drift behind you like a feather settling on still water. The candlelight flickers in your mind, a soft warmth that wraps around the stories you've traced across centuries. There is no rush, no urgency here, just the slow, deliberate rhythm of letters unfolding, of messages whispered in ink, and of human hearts reaching across rooms, streets, and miles. You can almost hear the faint scratching of quills, the soft scent of parchment, and the gentle rustle of paper being turned, all blending into a calm, soothing lullaby. Remember, these women were navigating strict social codes with cleverness and care, and their letters were their voices in a world that often sought to silence them. As you breathe in this quiet reflection, notice how the small flourishes, the playful humor, and the delicate timing carry weight far beyond the words themselves. The stories you've followed are not hurried. They unfold slowly, deliberately, like the soft folding of paper into an envelope, carrying the full depth of emotion across time. Imagine the recipients gently tracing each line, sensing the unspoken intentions, sharing a private moment with someone far away. That connection, tender and subtle, lingers long after the letter is read. A quiet testament to human intimacy and ingenuity. Let your mind rest on the knowledge that people have always found ways to connect, to charm, to flirt, and to care, even within the tightest constraints. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the calm, deliberate world of letters settle over you. The scratches of quills, the folded papers, the secret flourishes all fade into a gentle hush. Let your thoughts drift as lightly as a scented page, and feel the quiet comfort of stories stretching back through history, holding a space for patience, wit, and human connection as your eyes grow heavy and the world of sleep draws near.